Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today. I'm David Dworkin. I'm President and CEO of the National Housing Conference. NHC is the oldest and broadest housing coalition in America. You can learn more about us and how to become a member at nhc.org. I'd also like to thank the Annie E. Casey Foundation for making this webinar possible. And of course, HPN and Robin Hughes. Robin Hughes is the new Chief Executive Officer of the Housing Partnership Network, whose affiliates include the Housing Partnership Fund, Housing Partnership Ventures, the Housing Partnership Insurance Exchange, Framework Homeownership, and the Charter School Financing Program. Highly regarded as an industry leader with 35 years of experience in affordable housing and community development, she possesses deep expertise in advancing public policy at the local, state, and federal levels. Prior to joining the network, Robin led Abode Communities, a top 50 affordable housing developer nationwide and premier provider of environmentally sustainable, affordable housing in California. She served on numerous boards, task forces, and advisory bodies to advocate for resources, programs, and policies that support the preservation and production of affordable housing, including her tenure as board chair of HPM's National Network from 2016 to 2022, Community Development Trust, and the Low Income Investment Fund. Welcome and congratulations. You are certainly no stranger to HPN, but what a great opportunity to lead the organization and help a network of such influential housing leaders. Tell me a little bit about how HPN members were involved in pandemic relief.
Hi, David. Thank you for that wonderful and welcoming introduction. And HPN is very excited to partner with the National Housing Conference on this really important webinar. So our members, our HPN members, were affected by COVID, as many of us were throughout our nation. Our multifamily operators and owners were very much concerned about keeping their residents safe and stable in their homes during this early time of the pandemic, but also making sure that residents had access to the basic things that they needed, whether it was food, access to medical care, early rental relief that was out there, technology so that their kids could continue to learn during the remote learning phase. Our members were also concerned about their portfolio, property operations, the safety of their properties, residents being able to pay their rent early on in the pandemic, and came together focused around those issues. And our CDFI members were very active in providing loan and assisting loans through the Paycheck Protection Program to ensure small business continued to have their doors open and people were employed. So, our members were in all spaces in the economy. But one place, and you'll hear about this more today as part of this panel, is that very early on in the process, our members began to advocate for rental relief for residents on low-income renters throughout the country, as well as capital and rental assistance for the continued production of affordable housing during the pandemic. One way in which HPN supported our members during this time is we convened what we called virtual member meetings, where our members could come together and engage in peer exchange and learn from one another, and really talk about the best practices of the time, whether it was dealing with business continuity, how to manage HR policy issues, how to manage issues related to property operations, how we were going to deliver resident services on site or remotely during this time. So it's a really great opportunity for this power of peer exchange and lessons learned and sharing information to come together through what we're now using as this virtual platform.
That's great. And you know, in your role running Abode Communities in California, I think you saw firsthand how the emergency rental assistance program played out on the ground. I'm always interested in, I like to say, in the views of our members who have mud on their boots and you are certainly one of those. It's a high compliment from NHC. Can you tell us a little bit about Abode's experience here?
Yeah, so very different than what you'll hear from our HPN members later on in this discussion. In California, the state and local government really took the lead responsibility for implementing the emergency rental assistance program here in our state. And tenants or residents were responsible for applying for the assistance, and then landlord would submit complementary documentation to support them. But if you didn't live in affordable housing and didn't have the support system of affordable housing, that grassroots, how you get information out wasn't there. And at Abode Communities, our property management staff and our resident services staff did significant outreach to engage residents in this process, to help them pull together document for submission. And ultimately, we had to put our own documentation together. But the system and process were fraught with some challenges. And we realized that, once again, we have this big digital divide on needing cell phones and cell phone numbers or email addresses or just access to technology to make those resources available to residents. So again, at Abode Communities, we had to figure out how to bring those resources to our residents during this pandemic. So, I think it was, and the reason why Abode Communities did it is we wanted to make sure that our residents who had accumulated debt during this time were able to pay on the rent and not have this financial obligation. But we were also very concerned about the financial health of our portfolio as well. So it helped to cover those dual responsibilities. And again, what we'll hear later on, I can just imagine that when you have presence of nonprofits on the ground leading these efforts, the experience in other parts of the country was so very different than in particular low-income Californians.
So in California, I believe the state had some of the funds, but a lot of the funds went to localities, and I know that created some complexity for organizations like yours who were statewide with helping people in all these different communities that have different forms to fill out. Also, when we're talking about low and moderate income tenants, as you mentioned, the digital divide is more than just having access to a computer. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, so David, you're right. In Abode Communities at the time, the existing portfolio was primarily in LA County. So we were lucky that we only had 2 cities in the state to deal with, but each of them had their own very complex online system for accepting applications. And so again, it was really deploying our staff, in particular our resident services staff, working hand-on-hand outreach with our residents and providing access to technology. We were really, really lucky during the pandemic that Abode Communities received a technology grant. So we were able to actually get devices out on the site so people had access to devices. But it was really our resident services team working hand in hand with the residents to gather information, to upload information, and then just continuously following up. And my guess is even with that level of outreach, we may have gotten to like 75% participation. There were still other residents who just elected not to engage in the process.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time, and I think all of us in housing certainly saw the beginning of the pandemic as an existential threat, and those of us who were responsible for raising money for organizations were all worried. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Are our donors going to be there for us? They were big time, but they also, we found that it was an amazing opportunity to really help people when they were in the most trouble. And it was incredibly gratifying, especially for you and your affiliates, to be there for folks. And I think when we look at the predictions, which we shared of a eviction cliff and what could come, and we look at over our shoulder now at the numbers, and how many people we kept in their homes.
Mhm.
I mean, you must have had that experience just personally. It's Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, yes, David. Throughout the pandemic, but in particular early in the pandemic, I just continue to think about how grateful I was that abode communities and other HPN members were able to provide stability for our residents in their home during this pandemic, and to provide the support and aid they needed to remain stable and get access to resources. Because we heard so many stories of people who were living in small contained condition. The mom would have COVID and need to isolate herself in their tiny 1-bedroom apartment, in the closet, or in one of the beds, things like that. And so the fact that we as a sector were able to provide just high quality space for our residents, but more importantly, to work hand in hand with them to keep folks in their home during that time, was incredibly satisfying for abode communities, our entire team. And the other thing that I think we responded well to here in California and perhaps other places was to actually get folks off the street too. So Project Home Key was a big initiative here in California, where with the state government, hotels were purchased, and people experiencing homelessness were able to move from being on the street, living in unsecured position, into supportive housing during that period of time. So I think you saw the nonprofit sector, in particular the affordable housing sector, taking that call to action and making sure that the residents we serve in the broader community remain as safe and healthy as we possibly could through our resources and government resources that we received during that time.
Well, I just have to say that, HPN and Abode and HPN's members, you really stepped up in a way that I don't think anybody could have foreseen. And it's all of us, I think, are both grateful and proud in the ways that we were able to be there for our neighbors.
Yeah. Well, the audience I just can't wait to hear from this panel, because I think it is, an extraordinary thing for HPN members, and taking on a broader role in the direct delivery system of rental relief during this period of time. And while you'll hear from each of them, and while they had these neighborhood connections, these communities connections, partnerships on the ground, being part of this delivery system really took them to the next level. But they were able to serve, perhaps, I'm going to say, more people in a more efficient and nimble way than systems where that did not include nonprofit affordable housing developers and operators as part of the delivery system.
And I'll ask just one last question before we move into this incredible panel of experts with such diverse experience. But where do we go from here? I mean, how do we take what we've experienced and learned and really apply it to the broader world of affordable housing and homelessness?
Yeah. So David, you alluded to this earlier. So the need for emergency rental assistance does not end when these funds run out. We have 10 billion people who are, according to a census number I saw recently, who are behind on their rents. 60%, that's a couple months behind, but for the most part, the others are multiple months of rents in arrear. And there's just increasing concern about evictions. A number of people are in a place where they're uncertain because of loss of job or reduction in employment that they're going to be able to catch up. So there's still a need for us to think about how to ensure that people, after the eviction moratoriums expire, after the tenant protection goes away, that people continue to remain in their homes and we don't have this flood of evictions throughout the system. I know that the HPN members are already talking about what policies and so forth they put in place to address this issue. But in the broader space, we know that we're going to perhaps see this tsunami of eviction. So, I think we all hope that there is a another round of this. And I think what you'll hear again from the HPN members today is having practitioners at the table with policymakers as they are designing programs or implementing programs is really key, because they can foresee some of the potential pitfalls. They can talk about how do you really get to the people that are in need of these type of resources. So making sure that there's that connection and those resources available when programs are being funded or being designed or expanded. But I think we all need to continue to advocate for more rental assistance to support tenants and residents as the moratoriums expire. It is also, a lot of concern that it's going to lead to more homelessness. So how do we make sure that we also have rental assistance and permanent supportive housing that addresses folks who are living on the street? So we'll hear more about the lessons learned from our panels, but this is just as we saw as a sector at the beginning of the pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, as things begin to go to that next phase, our continuous advocacy and working with our policymaker and congressional leaders and Treasury and the White House, like developing and implementing these programs are critically important.
Really is, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody here. And this is the best part of the time for me, because I actually get to learn rather than talk.
Yeah.
So we'll get right to it.
Well, David, thank you for this conversation and this partnership as well. I'd like to introduce the HPN's Vice President for Policy, Shannon Ross. She heads our small but mighty policy team in Washington, D.C., and she is going to moderate and facilitate the panel discussion. So Shannon.
Thank you, Robin and David. Great start. I'd like to invite the panelists to join me. I think as Robin and David previewed, we have a really exciting discussion for you all today. All three of these panelists were part of a working group that we ad hoc put together during the pandemic to talk about HPN members who are administering ERA or different kind of rental assistance programs. And it's been a true pleasure to work with them on that. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more, but just quickly, we have Peter Elkowitz, the president and CEO of Long Island Housing Partnership from Long Island, New York. Julie Porter, the president and CEO of Dream Key Partners in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Kyle Webster, the general counsel and VP of housing from Action Housing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So thank you all for joining. And I think you guys can describe your role in rental assistance better than any of us can. So starting with you, Julie, I'm wondering if you could briefly describe how what Dream Key's emergency rental assistance program was and how you came to take on this role.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm really appreciative of being here today. So Dream Key is located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're an affordable housing developer, and also we have home ownership programs. We had never taken on any type of emergency assistance program, and certainly didn't provide any supportive services or critical care. But we did have a head start. And that was the great thing. Our local United Way of Central Carolinas came to us probably in April of 2020 and said, we're worried about the people who already have affordable housing. They're stable in their housing, either with our housing authority or with light tech developers. And also Dream Key, we want to keep them stable. So they gave us kind of a jump start of $500,000 to provide rental assistance, with which we developed an online system. And it was the first time our city had ever had any type of an online system for rental assistance or critical care. And we developed an application that went right online. So we were able to get that probably $500,000 out, in the first couple of months. And then, by the end, we were delivering that much in a day. But so we were able to get that going really quickly. Then at the end of 2020, we actually ended up being a direct contractor, not a subrecipient, but a direct contractor for the city of Charlotte to deliver rental assistance programs. And I think we delivered about $9 million in 2020. And then actually improved our systems even more in 2021 as more money started to come our way, and ended up really upping our game in terms of a Salesforce system and online system.
Great. Well, excited to hear more about that. Peter, I'll turn to you next. Can you tell us a little bit about how Long Island Housing Partnership got involved in ERA?
Sure. Similar to Julie, we're a not-for-profit developer of affordable housing on Long Island. We provide technical assistance to local governments, not-for-profits, and private developers. We do education and counseling, and we do the typical housing programs, down payment assistance, and employee-assisted housing program and rehab programs. But how we got involved in getting involved more with ERAP on Long Island was at local governments, mainly the towns out here. We're very geographically broken down. We're actually 13 towns, 2 cities, 2 counties, and 95 villages. So 2 of the larger towns was considering how they would administer their ERAP funds. Basically, they had a few options. One, administer ERAP themselves with their staff, have New York State administer the program, or the third option was have a local housing not-for-profit administer the program. And after the town reviewed the New York State's agreement to have New York State administer the program, both towns at different times decided that they would procure the services of a local not-for-profit housing organization to administer the ERAP programs. Both towns wanted to have total local control over the ERA program, specifically in their towns. They actually LHP was assisting a third town at the time on Long Island, administering a rental and mortgage assistance program that was funded through HUD during COVID. So when this was all prior to us getting involved in ERAP, when they heard that, they actually contacted us after they procured services for us to be involved. LHP went into contract with the first ERAP program on March 31st, 2021, which was very late. And ERAP 2 for that same town, we entered into contract on August 9th of 2021. To give you an idea, the total town allocation for both programs was a little over $40 million. It is now being amended again to add an additional $4.7 million to our contract. So we sold slightly under $45.5 million for that first town. Even later yet, 5 months after that, a second town came to us. Shannon's laughing a little bit because we would always meet on Friday afternoon, and she was waiting to hear what Kyle, Julie, and the rest of us had to say what that happened that week. But we entered into a contract on June 15th for both ERAP 1 and ERAP 2 for the second town. This is what was really critical. As everything from the first town program was developed and updated already, LHP was able to replicate that town's program to the new town. It saved tremendous time and money. However, LHP did have to hire additional staff and also had an RFP for our local not-for-profit community partners in that new town. The total allocation for this town for ERAP 1 and 2 was a little over $15.85 million. Both of them totaled over $60 million, and it happened within 5 months that we were involved. And I'm sure we'll talk more about later on how the program went, but it typically covered everything for 18 months for rental arrears, utility allowance, and other related housing expenses, including prospective rents. I must say, both towns' programs are running well, and I want to thank HPN and the whole team here for helping us to get up very quickly.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And last but not least, Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about Action's rental assistance program?
Absolutely. So similar to what Julie said, 2.5 years ago, Action Housing didn't do any rental assistance. I was also general counsel of Action Housing, and that was it. And I had no direct reports. So COVID did a lot of weird things to us as an organization. So what happened in the summer of 2020, the state of Pennsylvania created what was called the CARES Rent Relief Program. And that was a program funded through the CARES Act. And it was clear that it was going to be a very large scale program in Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh sits. And there were some questions about capacity and how it was going to be run based upon the existing infrastructure that had never come even close to what that program was set up to be. So Action was one of 4 nonprofits tapped to assist the government in running that program locally in Allegheny County. That program had some complications, and nationally you can read about it. It was not seen as the most successful initiative, but it's also because it was very unprecedented in size and scope, and it was something that we had never done before in the state of Pennsylvania. In October of 2020, Allegheny County actually formally pulled out of the state program and launched our own program, and Action Housing was put in charge of that program. So publicly facing, it was the same program, but on the back end, it was different funding, still CARES Act, but it was direct county allocation, and it was a different program. So from when Action took over in October until the end of the program in December of 2020, the program gave out $14.5 million. Prior to that time, we'd given out about $1 million in rental assistance in the county for the 3.5-month period prior. So what we like to say is it was a very successful 10-week program. Unfortunately, it was 6 months long. As a result of that, when ERAP got announced, Action Housing actually approached the county and said, can we be in charge? Because what we think we bring to the table is capacity. And that's, rental assistance was never our forte. It wasn't a thing that we did pre-COVID. We are a developer. We are a property manager. We are a homeowner program, mortgages, stuff like that. We don't exist too much in the rental assistance space, but we did see that there was a capacity need. And so we offered, and the government said, well, what if we put you as a player? We kind of talked through it and we said, essentially, either we're in charge or we're not a part of it, because we want to be the ones that run it and make sure that it's done right. And the government said, absolutely, sure thing. Now, at this point, we've now given out $130 million plus in the Allegheny County Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So over the last 2 years, Action Housing has directly administered about $145 million in rental assistance, which is pretty unprecedented. Our program is actually in the process of ending right now. And we're currently working with the county on what it looks like moving forward. But that's the basic history of what got us to today. Housing stabilization is now one of our largest departments, and I'm now the VP of housing as kind of a result of all that. So a lot's changed, but that's kind of what brings us to the rental assistance space.
Great. Thank you all. So I'd like to take a little more, just a reminder to the audience that if you have questions for our panelists, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So please use that, and we welcome, questions from the audience as well. But Julie, I'd like to come back to you. You mentioned that you had experience as early as April 2020 having United Way come and ask for money, or ask you to help them give out rental assistance money. Can you tell us some lessons that you learned with that early experience that helped you get the Charlotte program up and running so quickly once ERAP was announced?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of different things. One, we had no relationship with landlords. We obviously with our own apartment communities, we had the landlords, but with not having other relationships, we actually sought a third-party relationship with something called Social Serve. It's a nonprofit here that was working with other nonprofits to place people in affordable housing, or actually what we would call naturally occurring affordable housing. So they had those relationships already built. That was really helpful to us because they ended up being kind of a contractor on our behalf to get the checks out the door to the landlords. So it ended up being a 3 kind of prong program. That was a big lesson. It was like, okay, you can't necessarily stand up and protect against fraud and get money out and make sure that all the kind of clocks are turning unless you have really good partners. The city of Charlotte at that point was the only recipient of the funds. So we didn't have relationships at that point with our local county or the state. So I think it was easier also being a direct contractor, because as things came up, we didn't have to procure right then because we were the contractor. And so we were able to develop those online systems that no one had. And at that time, nobody did have, Shannon. I mean, it was just, there was nobody to copy in this type of a program. So we were definitely flying out there trying to develop programs. The other one was to get enough people on board. We had to hire about 45 temps on an emergency basis, and we were able to do that fairly quickly and get them trained. We trained them for a week, and then they were pretty much out there doing it on their own. But that was another important thing, was getting the temps and getting the labor that you needed to be able to handle the volume of applications that came in, because the volume was really pretty incredible for a period of time.
Well, Julie, I remember you all were one of the first ones with the technology, because one of our first meetings of working group, your team demonstrated what your technology was, and I believe some of all of our members copied it, at least to start with. So
yeah, it was
smart. A lot of
Sheet.
learning for everyone.
It was Smartsheet to begin with, and then that just kind of ran out of capacity, and we ended up going to a Salesforce system. Salesforce system was expensive to develop and probably cost us about $400,000, but it ended up being the system that spoke well with the city and all the other entities that were flowing money toward us. So that was really helpful also.
Great. Kyle, I know that one of the unique things about Actions program was the partnerships and data collection that you all undertook. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, Action asked to be in charge of ERAP, which, to be fair, my funders aren't on this call, but if they were on this call, they'd say, Kyle, we also wanted Action to be in charge. So it was a mutual relationship that we wanted to see happen. But, Action's a pretty respected brand. We are the oldest and largest affordable housing nonprofit in Pennsylvania, but we are a white-led organization that, is not, we're in communities, and I think we're generally trusted, but we don't have that day-to-day trust that, a lot of key organizations do have. And, we also are an entity that just is not as, directly connected to the people on the ground. So we knew that in order for this to be successful, we needed to have a lot of players at the table. And one of the first things we looked at actually was, what organizations are most likely to be advocates for the folks applying for this, and what organizations are most likely to, basically be speaking out and criticizing and constructively working to better the program throughout its life course, because we want to get them on the payroll and we want them to be a part of the team because we want to give them direct access. And we also want the trust that they have in their communities to, to spill over into this program. Rental assistance programs, many have failed in history, and many have not been successful for a variety of reasons. So the idea of trusting a rental assistance program is a bit of an uphill climb. So we put together a grouping of 26 nonprofits that were going to function as drop-in centers or as outreach partners or as kind of case managers for kind of what we refer to as the heavier lifts. These are organizations that predominantly focused on minority communities, that predominantly focused on marginalized populations. We had organizations that work specifically with immigrant communities, with the LGBTQ plus community, specifically the trans women of color community. We worked with folks who represent marginalized actual geographic neighborhoods. Here in Pittsburgh, we have an area called the Mon Valley. We have a couple of other neighborhoods like the Hill District, Homewood, et cetera, that have unique histories of redlining, of other things that have led to trust issues between government programs and the community. So we pulled all these organizations together, and I had Action function as the umbrella group with these organizations as direct contractors. And the reason we did this was because we wanted to have a really strong team. It would have been a lot easier if we had done this as a dictatorship and just been like, Action's in charge, everyone works for Action, we're running this. But we felt that it was really important to have all these players at the table, which, did challenge things at times. I mean, we had meetings weekly, and sometimes those meetings got kind of rough because our partners were strong-minded individuals who advocated for their communities hard, which is phenomenal. But at times we wanted to be like, we gave out $10 million last month. Can't you just say thank you? But it's true. They still have the right and should be at the table to advocate. So we wanted them there. And that was a really great model. We used a stipend model where we paid them a guaranteed amount of money each month so that they could predict staffing rather than doing a fee for service model, which we know that doesn't work for a lot of small minority-led organizations. Because some of these organizations we had at the table have maybe one staff member, if even that. So we wanted to make sure that they had the funding necessary to keep them at the table and to value their voice at the table. Additionally, one other thing that we did was we were very responsive to data, and we track absolutely everything. So our program is entirely online, and we track our staff's successes, their efficiencies. We track, a variety of different types of data in terms of age, gender, sexual orientation. Well, we don't track sexual orientation, but same gender, household, race, et cetera. And we would take that and map it in the county and see what populations are falling through the cracks so that we could be immediately responsive of partners we needed to either bring to the table or populations we needed to target to a higher degree. I think one of the key things we've learned through this process is we needed to be humble about the fact that, we were failing people. This program helped thousands of households, and it failed dozens, if not hundreds of households. And if we got too set on the thousands of households we were helping, which was great and something worthy of celebration, we would drop the ball a bit in terms of thinking, how can we better serve these individuals? Because programs like this historically fail certain communities, and we wanted to make sure that did not happen. A prime example we like to give of this is early on in the program, we were able to see that, Allegheny County is the second oldest urban county in the country. And we really weren't seeing a lot of applications from people over 60. And that doesn't make sense for the demographics of this community. So we partnered with the with some key organizations and did some targeted outreach to these communities by doing like bus shelter wraparounds, billboards, et cetera. And we listened to the communities that represent this population to say, how can we best reach these people? How can we best make sure that they are finding out about this program? And we responded to that, and we did what we were told, which was the bus wraparounds, doing intentional reach out to folks who own HUD 202 buildings and stuff like that. So, and that's just one example of kind of our responsiveness that we did throughout the process. And I will say, things are going to settle soon because our program is in the very much wind down process right now. But throughout the duration of our program, about 65% of our applications were submitted by households led by a person of color, and about 65% of our payments were made to households led by a person of color. And that level of equity in an Allegheny County-based program like this is unprecedented. And I believe that is because we had the right players at the table and we tried to be as responsive to them as possible.
Thanks, Kyle. That's really interesting. And Julie and Peter, I saw you all nodding a lot. So if either of you want to jump in at any point in time, please do. Peter, but the next question is for you. You previewed how you all were asked to join the ranks of ERAP administrators pretty late in the game, and into 2020. Can you tell us how, or 2021, excuse me, can you tell us how you got up to speed so quickly? And also, I know you have experience monitoring or administering relief after Sandy, and how that compared to this.
Sure. So when we got involved, Shannon, immediately we started tackling the ERA program from many angles, some angles similar to Sandy. So first we hired staff and developed their roles and responsibilities similar to Sandy. LHP hired well over 25 new employees. We doubled our size of staff. Many new employees were already trained in housing programs because they came from another housing organization. So that was a good thing for us. So we had minimal training on that end. Many other items that we considered was the office space, equipment, supplies. A lot of people don't have enough space to double in the size of their capacity overnight. But again, these are all things that were considered. Second, we had to write clear guidelines and procedures for the program, and then translate it into multiple languages, at minimum of 8 different languages. Third, we secured our community partners, as Kyle said earlier. The community partners were critical and crucial in this, to be in the community, right in the community. They helped with people filling out applications, getting the applications back to us. We had to hire our technical partners to the RFP process as well. We hired consultants for software and IT services. We had to hire consultants for call centers and development of instructional videos on how, in multiple languages, how to apply for funding. It's very important to mention, that we heard earlier, after the discussion with HPN members, I think Julie mentioned it, that we were also, when we were involved with these programs, we learned that our sessions that Shannon held, that we could use our current software, HomeKeeper, through Salesforce. HPN members were very helpful. Kyle's people were very helpful in helping review the software program, how it was being utilized, and how it could help with the ERA program administration. This was a real time saver for LIHP. We already started late, so this allowed us to say, all right, we already have a system in place. We have it in the office. Let's just start designing the system that we need. Big outreach plan was really critical. Staff carried it out immediately. We didn't want to think that these 2 towns were being left behind. Material was developed, including print ads, media ads. Informational documents were prepared for distribution in multiple languages. Social media, including videos on YouTube on how to apply in 8 different languages, we put on immediately. Seminars were held in communities. Elected officials held informational meetings in their communities. Staff reached out to food banks, libraries, schools, and government and not-for-profit agencies assisting those in need. As Paul said, we wanted to make sure that we were on the ground, we were at a granular level in reaching out. Staff also reached out to landlord and management companies to work together with LIHP and its tenants. A lot of our board members, a lot of technical assistance we provide to private developers had rental units. We reached out to all of them to get involved. The utility companies we reached out to, they also sit on our board. We had them do public notices to let people know that this was available. The software package was designed, built, and tested. Staff was being trained at the same time. We had program compliance going on and oversight done by all senior managers, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, and general counsel, all similar to Sandy, reporting up to me to let me know what was going on, where we need to deploy more staff, etc. But if I want to look at it specifically, how it compared to Sandy, I think Sandy was a disaster that had an immediate impact on housing. Okay, Sandy required quicker coordination efforts to find emergency housing for those individuals impacted by the hurricane that could not return home. It also required LIHP to perform damage and priority assessments on what was required, what programs would be required, how we were going to develop those programs. For example, many homeowners were living in their homes. Sandy hit right before winter in the Northeast here. And what we found out was a lot of people were property rich and cash poor, under 30% of AMI in the area. Everyone thinks Long Island's wealthy, but there were a lot of seniors that were in this condition. Their water heaters, their hot water heaters, and their heating systems were destroyed. We developed a program with the unions out here to get the equipment in and replace the hot water heaters and the heating system so they can remain in their homes over the Christmas and the holiday season in December and on through the cold season. Where COVID, I look at from a different type of disaster. It didn't impact housing needs initially. It impacted the population that was most impacted in housing needs was the homeless population. So there were emergency rent before the ERAP program. There were safeguards put in place to prevent evictions for renters and to prevent foreclosures for homeowners. And I think, as Robin said earlier, New York was had extended those even past the federal requirements for foreclosure and evictions. So everyone was working to establish a program in their area. All right. But one thing that I want to say about the Housing Partnership Network and the group that we had, they were playing a crucial role. They pulled together all the players that were working on these programs to communicate with each other and how everyone was developing and running their program. The big question always being asked at those sessions was, how were they interpreting and addressing certain regulations? Some questions included, what computer software was everyone using? How did you handle priority required in the regulations? How were people handling the fraud cases? How were you interpreting the regulations for clawback? What was everyone's understanding of the definition of obligated funds? These are only some of the questions that we addressed and hashed out at these meetings. The sharing of knowledge and documents was critical in saving time to get the funds out sooner to those in need by the not-for-profits. Another important item that we all shared with each other was any new information or changes being made by the Treasury to the program. Kyle was always great coming back and telling us what he heard or what was going on. So I really want to thank you, Shannon, for putting that together and keeping us together, even if it was on a Friday afternoon at 3:30, 4 o'clock. But we definitely enjoyed it, and it was very helpful to us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peter. That's very kind, and I enjoyed it too, even on Friday at 3 o'clock as was our meeting time. It looks like we're having an active question and answer coming through, so that's great. For the participants that haven't seen it yet, there's a Q&A. I think it's at the bottom of the screen next to the camera and video icon. If you would like to put a question in there, we can answer it either through text or verbally. And I'd like to take the first one and throw it out to the panel. It's from an anonymous attendee, asks, when ERAP rolled out, a lot of the affordable housing nonprofits were surprised at how many tenants wouldn't respond or refuse to sign off when the owners offered to apply for ERAP on their behalf. It's unfortunate. I guess I don't need to read this whole thing, but not only because they missed opportunity for assistance, but also because it demonstrated how much mistrust tenants have toward their landlord and government programs. How did you all work to overcome the issue of trust and engage tenants positively? And what can we do next time to keep the mistrust from being a barrier in the first place? who wants to kick it? Julie, you went off mute
Yeah,
first.
I'll jump in
Get us
real quick
started.
because, yeah, we had this issue. You know, we had people who we knew would qualify for this program who simply would not apply in our apartment communities. And it was absolutely driving us crazy, you know, because they were 6 months behind, 7 months behind, and you could not get them to apply. And so we did everything we could possibly think of. We ran Zoom calls, we did flyers, but the one thing that we finally did that did make some difference is that we engaged the people who had received it and said, hey, make sure that you're talking to the person who's in the apartment community safely, of course, and let them know that the program worked, because there's just a distrust of government dollars, period. You know, the people who are in our apartment communities, many of them have never received any kind of federal assistance. And so they just did not believe that the program was real, or they believed that there would be a clawback or some other type of a bad thing would happen, you know, if they took this money. They just didn't think it was real. But it did help, that peer-to-peer type of engagement, to actually get people to put in applications. But at the end of the day, I will tell you, there are just some people who would not apply for the program.
Yeah, I was gonna say we saw the same thing. Though I think one thing we did was the community partnerships were key. You know, in terms of trying to ensure that folks had groups that they trusted, that they understood, that they connected to, telling them this is a good idea. This is something that will help you. This is something, you know, really, really beneficial. I mean, one population I'll really highlight is the undocumented community of Allegheny County is one that is understandably very hesitant to participate in any government programs because of the fact that they believe that their status of being in the United States may change if they hand over information to a government-run program. So we intentionally partnered with the Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corps, which is a phenomenal organization, as well as a JOPO, which is an organization that works with African immigrants. And that was our desire to gain the trust of those communities, to understand that they could and should work with us because of the fact that we were partnering directly with organizations that they already had that trust with. Honestly, it's funny because Action's a landlord, and we really played that up a lot publicly. If you saw me on, none of you are in Pittsburgh, if you were in Pittsburgh and saw me on the news back in February or March of 2021, you would hear me saying, as a landlord, Action knows the importance of this program and stuff. And that was because after CARES rent relief, our biggest concern was actually trust from the landlord community, because they jumped through hoops and then didn't get paid. And so a lot of them had some negativity. So we really tried to play up our role as a landlord, and then also play up the role of our partners as tenant advocates and as members of the community, to try to build that trust on both sides as best we could. Some people still wouldn't participate. We actually very stupidly have a lawsuit right now against us that a landlord sued us because his tenant refused participation, and he felt that it was Action Housing's fault that the program was tenant facing, even though we were just following the government's orders. And so they literally filed a lawsuit to try to compel payment, and we have to spend money to defend ourselves in that. That just highlights the frustration I think people had. No program is going to be perfect. And as I always say at Action Housing, we have the privilege of serving and helping thousands of people a week and failing dozens. And that's just the reality.
We saw the same thing going on, but we combated it by I had staff out on the food bank lines, talking to people one-on-one so that they could feel a little bit more comfortable. We also internally did a change, is that we put some of our staff specifically working with the landlords and actually having them set up meetings to go right into the apartment complexes, into the community centers, to be available for them to answer any questions. We also trained their people who they were familiar with, who they pay their rents to, that they would train on the program and help people. So we tackled it from the landlord end, but we actually spent a lot of time tackling it from the one-on-one individual contacts with the tenants as well. So it was not one simple answer. You had to do different things to get people comfortable that, you know, this is a government program and it works.
Great. So we have more questions. Please keep them coming in through the Q&A box. And this next one also gets to one that Julie answered some in text as well. But assuming in the near future that there aren't any more big allocations of rental assistance funding, which I don't think any of us see that coming in the short term, what will you all, I think this is Peter, Kyle, and Julie, what will you all do to keep the capacity you built, and what will you keep from it, and how will you do it?
I would say this is a weird moment where people want to fund our ideas, which is kind of cool, and something that we're not taking for granted, though we are definitely capitalizing off of. So what we've been trying to do is figure out how to transfer the infrastructure we've built into the status quo. And that's something we're actively working with our government funders on, as well as foundations. We've been really tapping into the foundation community to help us continue a lot of this capacity while we wait for kind of what the next step looks like. We will never be given enough funding to have 26 nonprofits as subcontractors of ours. I think that's sad. I actually think it was a great model that I would love to see continue, even with we don't need $130 million to be able to have that infrastructure. But, I know that in the status quo, we won't even have probably like 10 million a year to spend, because prior to COVID, we had about 2 million annually in rental assistance in Pittsburgh. And I think we'll have more than that, but not drastically. So we've been capitalizing on grant requests, et cetera, to try to do what we can to put things in place to assist in what that transition looks like. One thing we've said many, many times is that we are terrified that we built out this amazing infrastructure and it will just be lost. And we want to really do everything possible to maintain as much of it as possible. And we are working with our government funders. There's also the other stuff of Action feels very comfortable with what we're doing. Creating the status quo program, we can't be at the table because we're going to be responding to the RFP. So that complicates things quite a bit, because since we want to go for that money, we can't be a part of creating that program until the award is actually given through the bidding process. So, that's where we're tapping into Pittsburgh Foundation, Heinz Endowments, RK Mellon, et cetera. Pittsburgh's very lucky. We also have more foundations than the vast majority of cities of our size. So that's what we've really been trying to do.
Yeah, we have a challenge as well. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Our city is got about $4 million left. I believe our county has about probably about 6. And so we are absolutely getting to the end of the funding, and we don't know how they want us to proceed. So far, what they've asked us to do is basically work with the most vulnerable, those who are 30% AMI and under and facing evictions. We do have somebody on the ground at the eviction court itself, taking applications in real time. Absolutely, we're negotiating with the landlords on the spot, really trying to get them checks within a few days so that they will not put people out on the street. But the truth is, there's going to come a day when we're just out. And we're worried. Shannon, I don't know what else to say other than to say that there is going to come a day and it's going to be gone. Our city actually had one agency that provided most of the rental assistance. They still, don't really have the capacity for an online system. So, do we hand over our online system? That's certainly something that we would, talk about. We just don't know. We don't want them to go back to the status quo, which was really an in-person kind of on paper, person-to-person type of rental assistance program that just really had some equity issues in my opinion. I think that there needs to be a combination. Now, the one thing our city is doing that I haven't heard others doing is, instead of, providing ongoing rental assistance, to have kind of an emergency response team, because in Charlotte, it's a strong market city. So you have these situations where there are mass evictions, like a whole neighborhood. Recently, 100 single family homes was bought by a developer, and they're tearing all those homes down. So we were able to use, in that case, some of the CARES Act funding, and then also, or actually ERA funding, plus some private funding, plus some other government funding, in order to provide like deposits, moving expenses, those types of things to people. So I think that there might be some type of a different system that is set up that is much more responsive to emergencies on the ground as they go, as they happen. But that's happening more and more. You just see it all over the place in Charlotte, mass evictions as opposed to one at a time.
Wow. Yeah, I think it is sobering, the prospect going forward, but it's where we are. Peter, someone addressed this question to you, although, and so I'll send it to you first, but Kyle and Julie, feel free to weigh in too. The attendees asking, do you think the funds could have rolled out more quickly if Treasury had provided some safe harbors for states and localities to address fraud and clawback concerns? It almost feels like someone in our group wrote this, but can you go ahead and answer that?
I will say we had a long discussion about this, all of us on our sessions, to give us some safe harbors, because as you see, Carl right now is defending himself, not himself, but his company, and we're all, you know, no good deed goes unpunished. Usually you expect a few lawsuits from these situations, but it does cost the agency money, and it would have been nice to have some safe harbors. It would have been, you know, I know the last question you want us to wrap up of some ideas that we have to improve going forward, but you know, there is definitely that idea of safe harbors to the not-for-profits who are running it. I mean, we are not the state that was running it. It was running multiple areas throughout New York State. We were running 2, 3 3 towns, and that, you know, the lawsuits are what could win the not-for-profits, and I'm sure Julie and Kyle feel the same way. So we wish that next time there would be some safe harbors for us if they roll out a program like this again.
We certainly wish that there was safe harbor, but it did not slow down the funding. It
Yeah.
wasn't like we're going to go, okay, I'm waiting on Treasury, you know, to give me this kind of assurance that we're not going to get sued, or they're not going to come in and say, hey, you didn't catch this fraud. We're still worried about it. I mean, it's not like, you know, we don't think it can happen. We think it can. But there was no way that we were going to delay the program in any way just for that particular thing. So yeah, it would be nice. There were a number of things that would have been nice to have to get the money out faster, but this wasn't really one of them, because there's just no way. I mean, there were even times, I know that Kyle is in the same boat, where we were out, you know, $4 or $5 million without having our reimbursement from our city or our county. So, I mean, there are just times when you just got the money out, even if you didn't necessarily have it.
What I would say is, I mean, if there was a safe harbor, it would have sped up certain release of certain types of applications. That's where the slowdown happened. There was a certain caliber of application that we were very reticent to pay because we were worried about it coming back to us. And one thing we actually found is, because we were all learning this as we went along, Action Housing's team, we had an amazing team led by a woman named Natalie Ryan, who's on this call, so I want to embarrass her for a second. But led by Natalie, and then we also had a person who kind of worked in fraud prevention, Pierre, and the two of them put in amazing ways for us to ensure applications continue to flow, but also try to prevent fraud. The downside is a fraudulent application, and an application put in place by a desperate single mom who doesn't have time to pay attention. Those two things look the same. They don't look drastically different, and that made it really hard. So if we had safe harbors, which I think, you know, is something the government owes its partners, we would have been more comfortable releasing those payments. That being said, we also do know we prevented millions of dollars in fraud. And so, you know, it's a complicated, challenging thing. But I'm very well aware, and again, knowing that none of my funders are on here, but this is being taped, I'm very aware that I'm about to have a big fight with one of my two funders over fraudulent applications that we found after the fact were fraud. That our current lens makes it clear they're fraud, but when they were paid, we didn't have that lens. And I'm aware that I'm going to have to fight for that. And that kind of sucks as a nonprofit, because I think we did an incredible job. And if you ask Action Housing to give out $145 million in 2 years again, that number would bankrupt us if we didn't have some protections. Oh, one of my funders is on the call. Hey, Whitney.
Yeah, careful what you say there, Kyle. I will say, just to put an emphasis on it, I think you all mentioned it, but just to talk again about the role nonprofits played, many of our members fronted the money. I think that, you know, there's some head nods, some programs that HPN members were involved in fronted all of the money. The thing was that the nonprofit would write the checks, and at some point the government would pay them back. So I think that, you know, when you're looking at the role that nonprofits played in this, I think it's important to underscore the financial risk that you all took as well, that you are not only putting your staff and your time and trying something new, but you're putting kind of the financial health of your organizations on as well. But that's just to underscore that. So the questions still come in. I have one I think might be, let's see. How the change would you write? Okay, so one here I think boils down to, Kyle, you talked about collecting data. I know other programs collected it as well. Is there a way you can use the data you collected for long-term policy development, research, evaluation? Where does that data go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I can say on our side, I mean, Allegheny County is very unique. There was a New York Times article a few years ago about our Department of Human Services use of data and analytics in attacking homelessness and other systemic issues. So our county that I sit in is very lucky to have, I mean, the head of our DHS department is a data scientist. So we really focus on data usage. So there is a data warehouse that our county utilizes that basically stores all of the data from ERAP and all these other programs and uses them collectively to assist in addressing the various issues and needs around the county. So Action is using that data to inform a lot of other programs we're going to be doing moving forward. And we also know that the county plans on doing the same thing. We were able to see where was the need, where were folks at the highest delinquencies, because there's even stuff like that can inform us, such as if there were certain communities where we were seeing massive delinquencies and massive, eviction potential, those are possibly communities that need affordable housing investment to a higher degree than other communities in Allegheny County, which the whole county needs more investment, but we're able to see, okay, this community seems to have a unique need. So there is the need for an organization like Action or someone else to step in to build a new LIHTC building, to really focus on what type of programs could make sense there moving forward. So we continue to analyze that data, continue to use it, and it's also being used in conjunction with a lot of other data that we luckily have had taken from other programs by our Department of Human Services here in Allegheny County. So,
and I think there's a question as like to who owns that data. I mean, we have been approached by other nonprofits, especially like the job development type of nonprofits, who said, hey, can you let us know which of your customers might be interested in, learning about construction jobs, this, that, and so if somebody volunteered to want to know information about job training, we could do that. But we didn't necessarily feel empowered in the real time to actually hand over data to anybody other than who owned it, which we thought in our case was really the city or the county, depending upon where the contract came from. So I'm not sure exactly. We have tremendous data. I mean, everybody approaches us, our local college, all of our data warehouses, they want our data. I don't know that we own it. So we are still exploring that and seeing what kind of information we can glean from it. Certainly we've got all that access that Kyle was talking about, as we know where the need is. We know where the zip codes are that have the most need. So those are things that we can use, but probably not share.
Julie, one thing we've done actually, and we've done it sparingly because we don't want to overuse, but we've had a couple of other organizations say, hey, we'd really love to use your information. So we've offered on a very case-by-case basis to send out targeted emails where it's coming from Action, and we're sending it to them to give them the information and allow them to opt in. So we've been able to find kind of what we think is a comfortable workaround for that, again, on a case-by-case basis, because we don't want to be sending weekly emails to these folks, because then they're going to feel like they should have never signed up for this program. But we've done it a couple of times for very specific things.
Yeah, ours is a voluntary on the application process itself.
Yeah. And some of the data that we collected, we used it through the program to make sure that we were hitting all the different populations. We actually did a calculation beforehand to figure out how much staff we would need, what areas we had to go into, how do we hit the least likely to apply groups and where the rentals were. So, we used that data to make sure that we were hitting those groups as we were going along. So taking a more proactive approach there.
Great. Okay, I have one that we can hopefully fit in rapid before we get to the wrap-up question. And Leah says the length of time that it took for applications to be processed often resulted in applicants being evicted while they're waiting for assistance. Any thoughts or suggestions on ways these applications could have been processed more quickly? I know that in some localities that was more the case than others, but does anyone have a quick response to Leah about how applications could have gone more quickly?
Well, I think that's a great question, because we certainly struggled with that. A lot of times there were so many document requirements, and it wasn't, necessarily on us. It might have been on the landlord side. It may have, not being able to get the rent rolls that we were required, or the unemployment information we required. So much of the documentation, especially in the beginning of the program, was pretty onerous on people. And there was no workaround, because it was required that you have that documentation. So, no matter what, it was going to take some time. Once they had gotten to the self-certification of kind of income, I think things went a lot faster. But honestly, if someone is in, we now have developed on the website for those people getting rental assistance, so that if they, let's say they get an eviction notice and they have an application pending, they can actually send an alert and say, hey, and their application goes to the top of the rung, and says, okay, we're going to deal with this one first. We also, as I mentioned, have somebody at the courthouse for those people who might have applied but don't necessarily have an answer at that point. But those are things we learned, though. I mean, it wasn't something that just came naturally. Oh, this is taking too long, because everybody was looking at compliance and saying, do you have all the documents? And there were 10 people looking at every single file to make sure that you had it. So it was difficult in the beginning, especially.
So I agree with you, Julie. It developed better as time went on, because for like income verification, it was no longer a full income review unless you had the documents. You could do geocoding of the area. You could do categorical. If someone had a project-based voucher or it was in another program, we could use that. And then you had the self-attestation with no documentation as well, with the person just attesting. So that sped things up in this case, I would say. But yes, I think everyone's priority was to get the money out as quick as possible. I will say one thing that we added to our system was that once a person filled out an application, they got to let us sent back to them immediately, that they could bring to the courts to have a stay put on them while it was being considered. So,
I mean, one thing I would just want to add is fraud is what slowed us down a lot. How do you stop fraudsters from being fraudsters? A landlord registry that is compulsory, which is currently being challenged in the courts here in Allegheny County. If we accept that those are legal, that makes it massively easier for us to trust the applications we have and allow us to timely pay. That was the biggest slowdown we saw. In December of 2021 was when we really began to implement fraud prevention measures. And at that point, you saw a massive slowdown in our applications and people got frustrated. And it makes sense why they got frustrated. If we had a landlord registry that was compulsory, that probably would not have happened, or at least would have been very different to deal with. So that is the best thing I can come up with a solution. So advocate your local elected officials to implement landlord registries, make them compulsory. And I believe that will make these programs much, much faster.
Great. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic, as I knew it would be. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. I have one wrap-up question for final thought. Could you all provide us with one lesson that we learned that we should keep in mind as advocates and policymakers when we're considering future federal programs? And as a curveball, because you got that question in advance, there was also a question in the chat about state and local policy changes. So if you'd like to answer that instead, so either what could federal policymakers do in the future programs, or state and local changes, choose your own adventure. Let us know what we can take going forward. Who wants to kick us off? Peter, you're off. Go for it.
Sure, no problem. I think making sure that there are clear regulations with access to whether it's federal, state, or local staff to address any regulatory or program questions in a timely manner. I know there's a transition from one year to another of the federal administration, but clear definitions would have been cool, because I know a lot of our questions went around the regulations and definitions. I think in the future, it could have been a tremendous saving admin funds if there was a program that was assigned, as opposed to all of us developing our own internal programs. Because I heard, as someone said earlier, I think it was Julie, how much it was spent to design the program. We all probably spent around that to design the program. And then I just think, someone that individuals developing programs like this and regulations should not only have policy experience and should talk more with people that work in the field. And I think David was saying something earlier about that, but it is so true. You know, it's one thing writing a policy, but does it work in the field? What are the questions that are going to be in the field for us?
I may be a little bit, I don't know, I'm maybe Pollyanna-ish on this, but I actually think Treasury did a pretty remarkable job. They really did listen and adjust the program in real time. HPN was a big help with that. I know that you guys were interfacing with Treasury and administrative officials quite a bit, but this was a program that I thought actually worked very well. And I think we got as much cooperation as we possibly could, given that it is a federal government program. I think on a state level, they need to trust the local system. That was one thing that we did have an issue with. You know, our state decided to do their own program, and it had a little bit more kind of hiccups rolling out. They did get the money out, so it ended up being great. But if they just trusted and listened just a little bit more, and then I'll just go out on a limb, sort of like what Peter said, listening to the people who are actually affected. You know, I just really feel like if somebody we have to prioritize people who are being evicted or facing eviction. And we really have to come up with some different types of safety nets there, because really that shouldn't be happening as often as it does here.
I mean, I'll echo a lot of what they just said. I mean, I think at the federal level, I agree, it was good. I wish that there had been a little bit more forcefulness at the federal level, because I think that there was permission for certain municipalities that were not invested in the success of the program for it to not be successful. And I would like to have seen the federal government force their hand a little bit more to try to be successful, because I know that in some of some areas that are not as focused on housing stabilization as Allegheny County didn't have successful programs, and I think that was because the politicians and elected officials there were permitted to not have it be successful, and I think that's unfortunate. I will say, I mean, echoing what Julie just said, the trust piece, but looking at the other side of it, is Action Housing has never experienced a program that was so truly collaborative and where there was so much mutual trust between the funder and the provider. This is where I'm going to get back to good graces from just saying the thing I said about Whitney. Whitney, who's from the city of Pittsburgh, Chuck from Allegheny County, and their superiors in their respective funding organizations truly trusted Action Housing, and Action truly trusted them. So there was a lot of very candid conversation in a way that I've never really seen. And I really think that that was beneficial to making it work. You know, just getting a little bit deep, this conversation, this program got rough, and I got some personal death threats. Our funders were incredibly responsive to that. And I think that's something we've never really seen in regards to how responsive they were to making decisions in real time and not allowing bureaucracy to hold back the need to make urgent decisions. That's a more severe thing, but there's been other less severe things that have happened through the last year and a half where there was a need for some fast decision-making, and our local funders really trusted us and listened to us and worked with us to come up with immediate solutions rather than sticking to the usual bureaucracy that I think we stick to. And in terms of things we can do better, I'll plug what I just said, which is I think landlord registries will really make rental assistance programs more successful. And I really think every municipality should implement those, and they should be viewed as constitutional across the country. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all again. I saw Jill from HPN just plug this. I was just going to say that more in writing on the work of this group will be coming out in case studies later this month. So stay tuned for that. And David, thank you for having us, and back to you.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you to Robin Hughes and Lisa Alberghini. What a great conversation. Appreciate all of the panelists being here. I also want to thank Brittany Webb on our staff, who has done such an amazing job of putting these webinars together. And then finally, I want to say thank you to Jean Sperling and Erica Potig at the White House and Noel Poyo at the Treasury Department. They really have done an incredible job helping make sure this program works. And in particular, shout out to Jean, who came on a webinar with us and started it by saying, tell me what we're doing wrong. We know what we're doing right. And we can't fix what we're doing wrong if you don't tell us. And wow, when was the last time you heard that from a senior government official? And I think it showed through the program. Finally, I'd like to suggest for those of you who are working with tenants who benefited from the program, help them send a thank you note to their member of Congress and their senators. You know, this program got funding. It had an enormous impact in people's lives. We go back to these folks for funding for a wide range of programs, and they rarely hear about the impact they've had in people's lives, and how powerful is that? So thanks everybody for being with us, and we're looking forward to doing this again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.